Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Imagine waking up in the year 2050. The skyline of your city is filled with drones. AI assistants greet you with personalized news, and electric cars glide silently down smart roads. But how did we get here? To understand what America might look like in 2050, we first have to look back. Throughout its history, the United States has evolved through cycles of disruption and reinvention, each era reshaping the nation's identity. From the birth of the Republic to the chaos of the Civil War, the Industrial Boom, World Wars, civil rights movements, and the digital revolution, history has been the roadmap of America's transformation. This video will examine how those historical patterns, combined with current trends, can help us make sense of where the country might be headed. We'll explore key areas such as demographics, politics, the economy, technology, climate change, and global power shifts, using the past as a lens to understand the future. The goal isn't just to speculate, it's to connect the dots between what has happened and what could happen. Because the forces that shaped America before are still shaping it now: migration, innovation, conflict, and resilience. So ask yourself, will America in 2050 be stronger, more divided, or completely reimagined? What role will you play in shaping that future? Let's dive in. To understand where American politics might be headed by 2050, we have to look at how it began and how it evolved through crises, reforms, and revolutions of thought. From its foundation, the U.S. political system was built on ideals of representation and checks and balances. But history shows us it's never been static. In the early years, politics was dominated by the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, followed by the emergence of Republicans and Democrats. Throughout the 19th century, the Civil War and the abolition of slavery dramatically reshaped the political landscape. In the 20th century, movements like women's suffrage, civil rights, and the Vietnam War protests redefined what political participation meant in America. Fast forward to the present, 2025, and American politics is at a crossroads. Polarization is at historic highs. Social media has transformed how people engage with politics, creating echo chambers and accelerating the spread of misinformation. Voter turnout has seen a surge in some areas, but trust in government institutions continues to decline. There's a visible generational divide, not just in values, but in political participation and expectations. Technology, especially AI and data analytics, now plays a major role in elections, campaigning, and public opinion shaping. Now, let's look ahead to 2050. The political map of the United States could look very different. One of the most significant drivers of change will be demographics. By 2050, the U.S. will be a majority-minority nation. Immigration, urbanization, and generational change will make the electorate younger, more diverse, and possibly more progressive on social issues, yet still divided economically and culturally. The possibility of new political movements rising to challenge the traditional two-party system in the United States reflects a broader dissatisfaction many Americans feel with the current state of political discourse. For decades, the U.S. has been dominated by the Democratic and Republican parties, but growing frustration over partisan gridlock, unresponsive leadership, and the perceived inability of either party to address urgent societal issues has created fertile ground for alternative political forces to emerge. This discontent isn't limited to just fringe voices. Across the political spectrum, many citizens, especially younger generations, express the view that the existing system doesn't represent their values or priorities. Whether it's concerns over climate change, income inequality, civil liberties, or healthcare reform, a growing number of people feel that neither major party is truly fighting for their interests. This opens the door for independent candidates or third-party movements to gain traction, particularly if they offer fresh ideas, speak in unifying tones, or tap into the frustrations of traditionally underrepresented or disillusioned groups. However, the emergence of new political movements faces structural obstacles. The U.S. electoral system, particularly the winner-take-all approach in most states, favors a two-party model. But this could change. Electoral reforms like ranked choice voting, already implemented in states like Maine and Alaska, give voters more freedom to choose candidates without wasting their votes. Similarly, proportional representation, though less common in U.S. elections, could dramatically shift how power is distributed and allow for a more pluralistic political landscape. These reforms could break the binary nature of American politics, making room for centrists, progressives, libertarians, or issue-specific parties to gain real influence. Technology will likely play a dual role in this transformation. On one hand, digital platforms can help organize grassroots movements quickly, allowing previously marginalized groups to mobilize and build momentum without traditional institutional backing. AI tools could be employed to analyze public sentiment, draft legislation, or even simulate policy outcomes, potentially making political decision-making more data-driven and responsive to citizen needs. However, these same tools could also be manipulated. Disinformation campaigns, deepfakes, and algorithmic biases pose real threats to democratic integrity. Digital voting, while offering the promise of greater accessibility and turnout, comes with high-stakes concerns about cybersecurity, voter verification, and public trust. Ultimately, the evolution of the American political system will depend not just on institutional changes, but on cultural and technological shifts. If citizens demand more representation, transparency, and accountability, and if reforms are adopted to support those demands, then a multi-party future aided by AI and digital innovation may become a reality. But it will also require vigilant safeguarding of democratic norms to ensure that new technologies and political movements enhance, rather than undermine, the nation's civic life. There's even a possibility that we may witness a constitutional convention or calls for systemic overhaul. If the gap between the governed and the government grows too wide, public demand for reform could spark major political restructuring, similar to how previous crises like the Great Depression or Civil Rights era forced institutional change. In short, the political landscape of 2050 will likely be the product of both demographic shifts and technological transformation, tempered by the lessons of history. The question isn't just what form government will take, but whether Americans will be more united or more fractured in how they choose to govern themselves. To understand where the American economy might be headed by 2050, we need to trace the path it took to get where it is today. America's economy has never been static. It has continuously evolved, shaped by industrial breakthroughs, global events, and bold policy changes. In the 19th century, the U.S. emerged from an agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse. The Industrial Revolution transformed cities with factories, railroads, and mechanized production. It gave rise to powerful magnates and a growing middle class, but also created stark divisions between labor and capital. The Great Depression of era, the 1930s, stands as one of the most transformative periods in American history, not just for its economic devastation, but for how it fundamentally reshaped the relationship between citizens, government, and the economy. It wasn't simply a financial crisis. It was a systemic failure that exposed the deep flaws and unchecked risks within the capitalist model of the time. By 1929, America had enjoyed a decade of economic expansion known as the Roaring Twenties. But beneath the surface, the prosperity was uneven. Overproduction, speculative investments, lack of banking regulations, and stark income inequality created a fragile system. When the stock market crashed in October 1929, it wasn't just a correction. It triggered a domino effect that led to massive unemployment, widespread bank failures, and the collapse of countless businesses. At its worst, nearly 1 in 4 Americans were out of work. The American dream, which had promised upward mobility through hard work, suddenly seemed broken. The scale of suffering forced a dramatic rethinking of the government's role in economic life. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal was not just a series of emergency measures. It was a philosophical shift. The government became an active participant in stabilizing the economy and protecting the welfare of its citizens. Programs like the Social Security Act, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, were designed to prevent future collapses and provide a safety net. The New Deal also introduced job-creating, public works projects, and labor protections that recognize the rights of workers to unionize and bargain collectively. This era marked the birth of what some would call the managed capitalism model, where markets still drove the economy, but with strong regulatory frameworks and a social safety net in place to guard against extremes. Then came World War II, which ironically became the engine that pulled the U.S. out of the Depression. The war effort required massive industrial mobilization, leading to full employment and technological innovation. When the war ended, the US found itself in a unique position. Unlike Europe and much of Asia, its infrastructure was intact, its economy was booming, and it had become the undisputed leader in global manufacturing. The post-war period, especially from the late 1940s through the 1960s, was an era of unprecedented economic prosperity in the US. Suburbanization became a defining trend, as returning veterans used benefits from the GI Bill to buy homes, pursue higher education, and raise families. This fueled demand for automobiles, appliances, and consumer goods, industries that benefited from mass production and economies of scale. The federal government invested heavily in infrastructure, like the interstate highway system, while American companies dominated international markets. This period also marked the rise of the middle class as a stabilizing force. For the first time, large segments of the population had access to stable jobs, affordable housing, and upward mobility. The idea of America as a superpower wasn't just military. It was economic, cultural, and ideological. The U.S. became the model of democratic capitalism during the Cold War, positioned against the Soviet Union's state-controlled economy. But this golden age also had its limits. While many white Americans benefited from the post-war boom, systemic racism, segregation, and unequal access to housing and education meant that Black Americans, Latinos, and other marginalized groups were often excluded from full participation in the prosperity. In sum, the Great Depression exposed capitalism's weaknesses, prompting reforms that expanded the federal government's role in stabilizing and humanizing the economy. The recovery and post-WTOW boom solidified the U.S. as a global economic powerhouse. But it also laid the groundwork for future debates about inequality, government intervention, and the sustainability of the American dream. By the late 20th century, the rise of Silicon Valley marked another transformation, the beginning of the information age. Technology, software, and services replaced traditional manufacturing as key drivers of growth. This shift brought economic gains but also began to displace traditional blue-collar jobs. Globalization and outsourcing further moved production overseas, reshaping the job market. Fast forward to 2025, and the U.S. economy is led by tech giants like Apple, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. Innovation remains strong, but deep structural issues persist. The gig economy has introduced flexibility, but also insecurity for millions of workers. Automation is accelerating, and artificial intelligence is beginning to handle tasks once thought to be uniquely human. At the same time, income inequality has widened dramatically, with wealth increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few. Looking ahead to 2050, automation and AI are expected to be at the core of economic change. Entire industries could be reshaped. Transportation, finance, healthcare, and even law and education may rely heavily on intelligent systems. Routine tasks may be fully automated, forcing millions to upskill or shift into new fields. This could create widespread displacement, but also new opportunities in AI maintenance, human-centered design, ethics, and more. Another critical trend is the transition to green economies. As climate change pressures grow, the push for sustainability will reshape industries. Energy, transportation, agriculture, and construction will likely be rebuilt around clean energy, zero-emission standards, and circular economies. Green jobs may become the new manufacturing base, powering economic revitalization in regions hit hardest by past industrial decline. With these sweeping changes, policies like Universal Basic Income, UBI, may move from fringe proposals to mainstream reality. If automation reduces employment opportunities while boosting productivity, UBI could provide a financial safety net and rebalance wealth distribution. Alternatively, new models like robot taxes or digital dividends could fund social welfare from AI-driven profits. In 2050, the U.S. economy may be more digital, decentralized, and sustainable than ever before. But this future will depend on bold decisions made today about education, labor rights, taxation, and who gets to benefit from the technologies driving change. The story of America's economy is one of constant reinvention. Whether the next chapter will deliver prosperity for all or deepen inequality remains a question we must answer now. America has always been a nation shaped by its people and by the changing nature of its population. Throughout history, waves of immigration, cultural evolution, and social movements have transformed the country's identity and values. Understanding what American society might look like in 2050 requires a deep dive into these historical patterns and the trajectory they've placed the nation on. The idea of the United States as a melting pot reflects a national narrative centered on cultural integration and the blending of diverse peoples into a shared American identity. This metaphor, while optimistic, only partially captures the complex and often turbulent history of immigration in the U.S., a history marked by both opportunity and exclusion. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, the U.S. experienced several major waves of immigration. People came for various reasons: to escape poverty, persecution, war, or famine, and to pursue the promise of better economic prospects and freedom. Irish immigrants, fleeing the Great Famine in the 1840s, poured into East Coast cities like New York and Boston. Germans arrived in large numbers, many seeking political asylum after failed revolutions in Europe. Later, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Italians and Eastern Europeans, including large numbers of Jews escaping pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe, became the dominant immigrant groups. These populations helped build America's industrial backbone, working in factories, building railroads, and populating rapidly growing urban centers. This diversity significantly reshaped American cities. Neighborhoods became ethnic enclaves, like Little Italy or Chinatown, preserving languages, cuisines, and traditions while gradually adapting to American culture. Immigrant labor fueled economic expansion, providing a workforce that supported the rise of manufacturing and infrastructure development. Immigrants didn't just contribute labor, they brought cultural vibrancy, entrepreneurship, and social energy that defined the American urban experience. However, the melting pot was never a universally welcomed idea. Each wave of immigrants often faced fierce xenophobia and discrimination from earlier arrivals and the dominant culture. Irish Catholics were met with deep suspicion and hatred. Chinese immigrants, who were instrumental in building the Western railroads, were singled out for exclusion and demonization. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 marked the first time the U.S. implemented a law to ban immigration based on nationality. This was followed by further restrictions targeting Asian immigrants. By the 1920s, backlash to immigration reached a peak with the Emergency Quota Act, 1921, and the Immigration Act of 1924, which set strict quotas favoring Northern and Western Europeans while virtually eliminating immigration from Asia and severely restricting it from Southern and Eastern Europe. These laws were rooted in racist and nativist ideologies, including the belief that certain ethnic groups were more fit for American society than others. Despite these barriers, immigrant communities persevered. Over time, many groups assimilated into the broader American fabric while also influencing it, shaping politics, cuisine, music, language, and labor movements. Their children often achieved upward mobility through education, unionized work, and entrepreneurship, contributing to the rise of the American middle class. This dynamic, welcoming immigrants for their labor and potential, while simultaneously fearing their cultural differences, has been a recurring theme in U.S. history. And though the term melting pot implies blending into a uniform whole, a more accurate metaphor might be a mosaic or salad bowl, where different cultures coexist, interact, and influence one another without entirely losing their distinct identities. Ultimately, immigration has been both a cornerstone of American growth and a mirror reflecting the country's ongoing struggles with identity, inclusion, and equality. The tensions between openness and restriction, assimilation and diversity, are still present today. But so too is the undeniable legacy of immigrants in shaping what America is and continues to become. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s marked another critical turning point. It challenged the deep-seated racial segregation and discrimination that had persisted since slavery. With landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, the U.S. took major strides toward equality, but those battles are far from over. Each new generation has taken up the cause, from the fight for LGBTQ+ rights to movements like Black Lives Matter, demanding a more inclusive and equitable society. Fast forward to 2025, and American society is more diverse than ever. Multiracial families are increasingly common, Latino, Asian, and Black communities are playing growing roles in shaping culture, politics, and business. The traditional nuclear family has given way to a broader spectrum of family structures: single parents, blended families, same-sex parents, and chosen families. LGBTQ+ rights have seen significant gains in the past decade, though challenges remain in areas like healthcare access and legal protections. Younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, prioritize mental health, work-life balance, and social justice. They are also more likely to delay marriage, have fewer children, and live in urban or mixed-use environments. Education systems are under pressure to adapt, not just to changing demographics, but also to shifting priorities, focusing on creativity, emotional intelligence, and digital literacy over rote memorization and standardized testing. Healthcare remains a central concern. The U.S. has struggled with affordability and access, but telemedicine, wearable health tech, and AI diagnostics are beginning to change that landscape. By 2025, there's a growing push for equity in healthcare outcomes, particularly for marginalized communities. Looking ahead to 2050, America could become a true majority-minority nation, where no single ethnic or racial group makes up over 50% of the population. This shift will redefine what it means to be American, not just demographically, but culturally and politically. Multilingualism may become more normalized in schools and media. Cultural fusion will likely dominate entertainment, fashion, and cuisine. Family structures could evolve further, with increasing reliance on community-based or cooperative living models, especially in urban areas. The work-life balance may continue to shift toward remote and hybrid models, allowing people to spend more time with family and less time commuting. As automation transforms the job market, people might have more flexible schedules and shorter work weeks, giving rise to new forms of social interaction and leisure. Education will play a critical role in shaping this future. Schools may rely heavily on personalized AI tutors, virtual reality classrooms, and real-time performance analytics. But they'll also need to address issues of accessibility and equity to ensure every child, regardless of zip code, has a fair shot. Cultural education will become even more important, teaching empathy, global citizenship, and collaboration across differences. By 2050, America could be a vibrant, multicultural society that reflects the best of its diverse roots, if it embraces inclusion, invests in its youth, and continues the work of justice. Social change isn't a threat to the American identity. It is the American identity. America's relationship with the environment has always been complex, marked by both massive exploitation of natural resources and bold efforts to preserve and restore ecological balance. To imagine what the U.S. might look like in 2050, we need to understand how environmental concerns have evolved over time and how they're shaping the design and development of American cities and communities. Historically, the rapid industrialization of the 19th and early 20th centuries came at a heavy environmental cost. The rise of factories, coal-fired power plants, and mass production led to polluted air, contaminated water, and widespread deforestation. The prosperity that followed the Industrial Revolution often ignored ecological consequences. Rivers caught fire, cities choked in smog, and natural ecosystems were sacrificed in the name of progress. By the mid-20th century, the damage was impossible to ignore. Landmark events like the 1969 Cuyahoga River fire and the Santa Barbara oil spill catalyzed the modern environmental movement. Public awareness surged, leading to the first Earth Day in 1970 and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Laws like the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act aimed to reverse decades of damage and protect the environment for future generations. Fast forward to 2025, and climate change is one of the defining challenges of our era. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, wildfires, and droughts are reshaping the American landscape. Coastal cities like Miami and New York are investing in seawalls and flood defenses. The West faces intensifying drought and water shortages, while hurricanes in the South grow more frequent and destructive. In response, the U.S. is slowly shifting towards sustainability. Renewable energy, solar, wind, and hydro, is becoming more affordable and widespread. Electric vehicles are gaining popularity, and major automakers are committing to phasing out gasoline-powered cars. Sustainable architecture is on the rise, with buildings designed to be energy efficient, carbon neutral, and integrated with natural systems. Cities like Portland, San Diego, and Austin are pioneering green infrastructure. More bike lanes, green roofs, community gardens, and efficient public transit systems. Urban planning is evolving to prioritize livability and environmental resilience over pure economic expansion. Looking ahead to 2050, climate adaptation will no longer be optional. It will be essential. Cities across America may need to undergo dramatic transformations to survive rising temperatures and weather extremes. Infrastructure will be built with resilience in mind. Permeable pavements, flood-resistant construction, underground cooling systems, and disaster-ready power grids. The American agricultural system will also need to evolve. Climate-resilient crops, precision farming, and AI-driven irrigation could reduce waste and increase efficiency. Vertical farming and lab-grown meat may become common, especially in densely populated urban areas. Sustainable food systems could become a national priority, with local food production reducing dependence on long-distance supply chains. Urban development will see a surge in smart cities, high-tech urban environments that use data, sensors, and automation to manage everything from traffic flow to energy usage. Homes will be equipped with integrated AI systems that monitor air quality, regulate energy consumption, and even grow food in vertical or rooftop gardens. Public transportation might be autonomous, fully electric, and seamlessly connected across metro areas. Green architecture will move from trend to necessity. Buildings will be designed to generate their own energy through solar panels or wind turbines. Materials like carbon-absorbing concrete, recycled steel, and sustainable wood will become standard. Cities may even implement carbon budgets and green zoning laws to ensure long-term ecological balance. In this future, American cities won't just be more efficient, they'll be more human-centered. Walkable neighborhoods, abundant green spaces, and community hubs could redefine urban life. If embraced properly, environmental innovation could make America not only a leader in climate adaptation, but a model for how to build a sustainable and thriving civilization in the face of global change. America's global influence has evolved significantly over the past few centuries. From its early years as a young republic, the United States followed a policy of isolationism, focusing on internal development and avoiding entanglement in European affairs. However, the tides shifted dramatically during and after World War II, positioning the U.S. as the dominant global superpower and shaping its role on the world stage for decades to come. After the devastation of the Second World War, the U.S. emerged as a victorious nation with unrivaled economic and military power. The Cold War defined much of the late 20th century, with America locked in an ideological and political struggle against the Soviet Union. The period saw the establishment of key institutions such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, which were designed to promote peace, stability, and economic cooperation. During this era, the United States was not just a military and economic powerhouse, but also a leading advocate for liberal democratic values and capitalism on a global scale. The rise of globalization in the late 20th and early 21st centuries further solidified America's position as a global leader. American culture, politics, and economics spread worldwide, with Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street representing the epitome of global influence. Meanwhile, American military power and technological innovations, such as the Internet, made the U.S. the central player in shaping world affairs. By 2025, however, the landscape has become more complex. While the U.S. remains a key player in global diplomacy and trade, it faces increasing challenges from rising powers, most notably China. The geopolitical competition between the U.S. and China, especially in areas like technology, trade, and military influence, is reshaping international relations. America's leadership in multilateral organizations like the United Nations, NATO, and the World Trade Organization is still significant. But there is growing skepticism regarding American policies and leadership in certain regions of the world. Simultaneously, the U.S. must contend with global issues that require collective action, such as climate change, pandemics, and terrorism. America's leadership in these areas will be tested as other nations rise to take on more active roles in solving global problems. America's alliances and trade relationships will likely evolve as new powers and emerging economies assert themselves in international affairs. Looking forward to 2050, the future of America's global role is uncertain, as the balance of power continues to shift. While it's possible the U.S. will maintain its leadership position in global affairs, it could face increasing challenges from emerging nations, particularly China, India, and the European Union. These powers are poised to assert themselves economically, politically, and militarily, creating a more multipolar world order. Whether the U.S. can continue to maintain its dominance or adapt to a more competitive international environment will depend largely on its ability to navigate these new dynamics. In particular, America's relationship with technology, privacy, and cybersecurity will be a defining factor in its global influence in 2050. As digital technologies become increasingly integral to all aspects of life, the U.S. must balance its role as a technological innovator with the need to safeguard privacy and prevent cyber threats. In a world where data is as valuable as oil, America's approach to data privacy, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity will have far-reaching implications for its role in the global economy and political sphere. Moreover, international alliances and trade relationships will be reshaped as global challenges like climate change, global health, and economic inequality take center stage. The U.S. may find itself working more closely with other global powers, especially in addressing transnational issues. This could lead to new forms of cooperation, but also potential tensions as different countries pursue competing interests. Additionally, the increasing interdependence of global markets means that the U.S. will need to manage its trade relationships with emerging economies more carefully. Economic diplomacy will become just as important as military might, as global supply chains and international collaborations evolve. The changing nature of American trade, especially in sectors like technology, renewable energy, and healthcare, will significantly impact the U.S.'s position in the global economic order. In the realm of defense and military strategy, America will need to adapt to new global security threats, such as cyber warfare, artificial intelligence in military applications, and non-traditional conflicts like information warfare. The U.S. military will need to evolve its capabilities to counter these emerging threats while continuing to foster relationships with allies. In conclusion, while the U.S. will continue to be a major player in global diplomacy, trade, and security, the nature of its leadership will shift in the face of rising powers, technological advancements, and new global challenges. How America adapts to these changes will determine whether it remains a global leader or faces competition from other nations in the years to come. The U.S.'s ability to balance its domestic priorities with its global responsibilities will be critical in shaping its role in the world by 2050. America's global role has been one of immense transformation over the last few centuries, moving from a position of isolation to becoming one of the most influential superpowers the world has ever seen. This shift has been deeply shaped by historical events and the changing nature of global politics. In the early years of the United States, the nation pursued a policy of isolationism, focused on internal development and avoiding involvement in the complex entanglements of European and global conflicts. However, following World War II, the United States emerged as the clear victor, economically and militarily dominant. The end of the war marked a pivotal moment in history, and it set the stage for America's rise to superpower status. With the collapse of Europe and the Soviet Union looming, the U.S. emerged not just as a military giant, but as a cultural, economic, and political beacon for the world. During the Cold War, America's global influence expanded rapidly. The ideological battle between capitalism, led by the U.S., and communism, led by the Soviet Union, shaped the policies and alliances that defined much of the 20th century. The Cold War was marked by proxy wars, nuclear arms races, and the constant threat of global conflict, all of which reinforced the U.S.'s leadership role in world affairs. America not only led the NATO alliance but also championed the spread of democracy and liberal economic policies around the globe. In the latter part of the 20th century and early 21st century, the rise of globalization further entrenched the U.S. in a dominant global position. The spread of technology, culture, and trade, driven largely by the innovations of Silicon Valley and the reach of American media, made the U.S. an indispensable part of the global order. However, this period of unprecedented influence is now facing new challenges as emerging global powers assert themselves on the world stage, particularly China. In 2025, America's global role is increasingly complicated. While it remains a dominant force in global diplomacy, trade, and military power, it no longer enjoys the same unchallenged position it once did. China, in particular, has become a formidable rival. The rise of China's economic power, its military expansion, and its growing influence in global trade organizations, such as the World Trade Organization, are reshaping the global balance of power. Additionally, China's Belt and Road Initiative, which seeks to create infrastructure and trade routes across Asia, Africa, and Europe, represents a direct challenge to American influence, particularly in areas traditionally considered within the U.S. sphere of influence. Meanwhile, global diplomacy is becoming more complex, with multiple centers of power emerging around the world. The rise of other countries, such as India and the European Union, means that the global geopolitical stage is no longer dominated by the U.S. alone. America's traditional allies, particularly in Europe, are navigating this new reality by seeking closer ties with other global powers. This dynamic is further complicated by global issues like climate change, pandemics, and rising nationalism, which require international cooperation, but also breed competition and suspicion among nations. In NIFR 2050, America's role in the world will be shaped by several factors. One key question will be whether the U.S. will continue to maintain its position as a global leader or face challenges from emerging powers like China, India, and regional coalitions. The next decades could witness a multipolar world order where no single nation holds the global dominance America once did. The U.S. will likely find itself in competition with other powers for influence in critical areas such as trade, technology, and global governance. International alliances and trade relationships will also continue to evolve. America's traditional relationships with Europe, Canada, and Latin America will need to adapt to the growing influence of Asia, particularly China and India. The future of NATO, the United Nations, and other global institutions will be influenced by these changing dynamics, and the U.S. will need to manage its partnerships carefully to maintain its influence in these organizations. With the increasing importance of regional alliances, America may find itself working more closely with other global powers to address shared challenges, such as climate change, cybersecurity, and global health. One of the most critical areas influencing America's global role in 2050 will be its relationship with technology, particularly concerning privacy and cybersecurity. As digital technologies continue to reshape global communication, commerce, and security, the U.S. will have to navigate issues surrounding data privacy, surveillance, and the potential misuse of artificial intelligence. America's leadership in tech industries such as Silicon Valley means that the country will have significant influence over global standards for digital privacy and security. However, this influence will be contested as other nations, particularly China, develop their own technological ecosystems and policies that prioritize state control over digital information. Furthermore, cybersecurity will be a central focus of America's global strategy. With the rise of cyber warfare, the threat of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, and the growing reliance on digital technologies, America will need to strengthen its cyber defense systems while balancing the protection of civil liberties. This will require international cooperation, as global cyber threats do not recognize national borders. The U.S. will play a critical role in shaping global norms and agreements around cybersecurity, and its success in this area will have significant implications for its continued leadership in global affairs. In conclusion, while America's global role is still significant, the future will likely see a more fragmented and competitive international system. The U.S. will need to adapt to a rapidly changing world where rising powers and technological advancements challenge its influence. Its ability to maintain alliances, manage its global trade relationships, and lead in technology and cybersecurity will be key to determining whether it remains a global leader or faces a more complex and competitive international environment in 2050. How America navigates these challenges will define its role on the world stage for decades to come. America's cultural identity has always been dynamic, shaped by a blend of influences both internal and external. Historically, the development of American culture can be traced back to its roots in immigration, the arts, and the rise of distinct cultural movements that defined various eras. The influence of European settlers combined with indigenous traditions laid the foundation for a diverse and complex identity. The arts have played a critical role in shaping the nation's culture, with movements like the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s creating new forms of cultural expression, that would later define mainstream American culture. In the 1960s, the counterculture movement further transformed American identity, challenging societal norms and creating new expressions of freedom, creativity, and political activism. This era saw the rise of rock and roll, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and the LGBTQ+ rights movement, each of which left a lasting imprint on American culture. The digital revolution, starting in the late 20th century, brought unprecedented changes, with the rise of the internet, social media, and streaming services enabling American culture to be disseminated globally at a speed and scale never seen before. In 2025, American culture is heavily influenced by the rapid pace of technological advancements, particularly social media and streaming platforms. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube allow American culture to reach all corners of the world, while simultaneously reflecting the changing values and identities within the U.S. itself. American entertainment, including Hollywood, films, TV shows, and music, continues to dominate globally, but there is increasing diversity in the types of content that resonate with both American and global audiences. Pop culture is increasingly shaped by younger generations, particularly Gen Z and millennials, who use social media not only for entertainment, but also as a platform for social justice movements. Social justice movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and LGBTQ+ rights continue to reshape popular culture, forcing industries to reconsider traditional norms and inclusion. American culture is becoming more intersectional, acknowledging the diverse experiences of racial, ethnic, gender, and sexual minorities. These movements influence how content is produced, what stories are told, and who gets to tell them. As cultural values shift, the impact of these movements is clear in the rise of more diverse voices in music, film, literature, and television, promoting an inclusive society that reflects America's changing demographics. As we look to the future, the cultural landscape of 2050 will likely be shaped by further advances in technology, including virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, AR, and artificial intelligence, AI. Entertainment will no longer be confined to traditional media formats. AI-generated content, from virtual actors and musicians to fully immersive virtual worlds, could revolutionize the way Americans consume culture. Virtual reality will allow people to experience stories and art in entirely new ways, perhaps even allowing them to become part of the narrative themselves. AI could be used to produce content tailored specifically to individual tastes and preferences, leading to a more personalized and fragmented cultural experience. Simultaneously, the rise of global connectivity will encourage the exchange of cultural values and experiences on an even larger scale. With the world becoming increasingly interconnected through technology, the line between American and global culture will continue to blur. While the global reach of American culture through Hollywood, music, and fashion remains strong, there will be a growing influence of other cultures on American identity. As global platforms like TikTok and YouTube gain worldwide prominence, users from around the globe will contribute their voices and ideas to the American cultural narrative, influencing trends, entertainment, and even political discourse. In terms of identity, this global connectivity will challenge traditional notions of what it means to be American. The American dream, long associated with ideals of individualism and success through hard work, may evolve into something more collective as global movements for equality and sustainability gain prominence. There may be a shift away from an identity based on material success toward one that emphasizes shared values like community, equity, and sustainability. Cultural movements centered around climate change, social justice, and human rights will likely continue to grow in significance, impacting the way Americans view themselves and their role in the world. The cultural landscape of 2050 will also be marked by new forms of cultural movements that have yet to emerge. Just as the counterculture of the 1960s challenged the status quo, the next wave of movements could be driven by younger generations who have grown up with globalized technology and changing social dynamics. Issues like mental health, digital privacy, and environmental sustainability may take center stage in cultural discourse, influencing everything from politics to the arts. In conclusion, the American cultural identity of 2050 will be shaped by the increasing intersection of technology, global connectivity, and social movements. The evolution of entertainment will offer new ways for people to experience culture, and the exchange of ideas across borders will reshape American values and identity. As technology and cultural norms continue to evolve, the United States will likely find itself adapting to a more interconnected and diverse world, while still grappling with its unique role in shaping global culture. The question remains, how will American culture continue to evolve in response to these changes, and what kind of nation will it become in the next few decades? As we look toward America in 2050, the nation will undoubtedly undergo monumental transformations shaped by the forces of technology, politics, economy, culture, and the environment. The political landscape will likely experience a shift toward more diverse political movements, potentially ushering in a new political structure, possibly even a multi-party system. The American economy will continue to evolve, driven by automation, AI, and sustainability, while confronting challenges like income inequality and the redistribution of wealth. Technological advancements, particularly in AI, space exploration, and biotech, will redefine daily life, from transportation to healthcare to how we engage with the world. Socially, America will become more multicultural and diverse, with evolving family structures and values influenced by global connectivity and digital media. Environmental change will force cities and infrastructure to adapt, focusing on sustainability and resilience in the face of climate change. In short, America in 2050 will be a vastly different place from the nation we know today, but it will still be deeply rooted in the values and lessons learned from its past. These changes offer both exciting possibilities and significant challenges. It's up to us as a society to shape the future we want to see. So, as we wrap up, here's a question for you to think about. How will we, as a society, shape the America of 2050? Will we lean into the opportunities ahead, or will we struggle with the obstacles before us? I'd love to hear your thoughts and predictions. Drop your comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the future of America, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more insightful content on historical trends and what lies ahead.